Hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm your host, Mark Graben. Our guest today is Ken Segel. He is a co-founder and the chief relationship officer at the firm Value Capture. For more than 2 decades, Ken has helped shape Value Capture's DNA. And today, as the chief relationship officer, he cultivates executive partnerships, guides the firm's growth and marketing strategy, and coaches leaders who refuse to settle for average. So that'll be one of the things that'll be great to dig into here today, because Ken and Value Capture believes that world-class safety, quality, and financial performance can and must coexist. So Ken, welcome to this podcast. How are you?
Mark, I am not only very good, I'm really honored to talk with you today. I'm humbled that it's you, and also, the podcast record you've created here. It's great to be part of this learning community.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here, and why I emphasized this podcast is it was great having you on the My Favorite Mistake podcast, episode 147. I'll encourage people to go listen to that. I thought it was a particularly compelling story and lessons learned, and that story is also summarized in the book, The Mistakes That Make Us. And then we've talked, I don't know how many times, when I was hosting the Habitual Excellence podcast through Value Capture.
Yeah, we did absolutely, Mark. And, The Mistakes That Make Us, the book, I had Mark sign a copy of that book, and I have a daughter that just graduated from college on Monday, and I presented that to her as, I think, a meaningful kickoff gift for adulthood, because I think you did us all a service in the community of pulling the sort of fundamental lessons in there, that typically you don't learn, and they sort of go against the myths, but they're so deeply embedded in how we in the Lean community think.
Well, thanks, and congratulations to your daughter, and thank you for being willing to share your stories. So, people who listen to those other podcasts know this is hardly our first conversation on these topics, but I think we have a lot to explore here today. And I do want to. I'm not putting you on the spot, but you knew I was going to ask the standard. If I have a standard question here that I've gotten into asking people is about lean origin stories, or however you would want to frame it. I think your path to this, for people who know your story from My Favorite Mistake, I'll let you tell it. It's a very non-traditional pathway into this type of work and passion.
They're very non-traditional. I got out of college thinking my job was to change the world, and the way to do that was through public policy and sort of pulling big levers. Mm-hmm. And I headed off to Washington and started to both really enjoy myself in the politics, policy-making world, and sort of rising in that world, but did get a little bit disillusioned with trying to pull big policy levers and hoping everything would get better all at once, and some of the what feels like inherent waste in that process, and ended up getting into healthcare philanthropy. Mm-hmm. Back in Western Pennsylvania, where I grew up, at a health foundation that actually quite nicely was really interested in systems change. And that led to kind of an intellectual exploration and work to try to develop not just projects, but what would allow things to stick systemically. I was nonetheless headed out to go to business school at a fancy place when some of our work to try to develop better health systems, we came in contact with a guy named Paul O'Neill, who was the CEO of Alcoa, as we tried to organize a more systemic approach to the healthcare system in our city, in Pittsburgh, in the region. Yeah. And I had, the part getting to Lean came through Paul for me, through Mr. O'Neill, because a couple of things happened. First, he agreed to chair our effort, and I thought he would just be a significant business leader to sort of have the gravitas to pull people together. But in fact, he was one of the great systems thinkers and doers and leaders, that's in my view existed ever. And I made a decision at that point that he would be my graduate school. I ended up getting
Yeah.
an MBA, but staying local, and that I would go to the school of Paul O'Neill, and had the fortune of helping him and Karen Feinstein at the Jewish Healthcare Foundation and others organize the Pittsburgh Regional Healthcare Initiative. But as a key part of that, I remember Mr. O'Neill, once we'd gotten the leaders in the region to sign off on some perfection-based goals for safety
Mhm.
and quality of care that we were going to pursue, to say, now the way we do that and the way we go about it is really important. And there, since World War II, there have been some methods of advancing things systemically that have been proven quite superior to others. And I'd like the community to learn. And at that point, he brought in Steve Spear from the Harvard
Mhm.
Business School with his mentor Kent Bowen, and
Yeah.
and the Toyota Supplier Support Center themselves. And so our model cells in Pittsburgh were guided by some of that, deepest wisdom. And my light bulb continued to go off that there were
Yeah.
a very powerful body of human supporting work out there that I could learn a lot and gain a lot and develop a lot from if I were to expose myself to it further.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the great honors I've had in hosting this podcast was an opportunity to speak with Paul O'Neill, episode 124. So I'll point people to that episode and to hear, some of his thoughts directly. It's really powerful and still, of course, relevant. It's based on, certain key principles that I know you and I, share a deep belief in. PRHI, Pittsburgh Regional Health Initiative. I mean, I was first exposed to that, or I think introduced to it indirectly, probably about 2006, 2007, when I was new to healthcare. A book and at the time a DVD called "The Nun and the Bureaucrat,"
Right.
produced by some people who had connections to going back to Dr. Deming, back in the day. And what I remember of PRHI, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts and recollections of it, that it was an effort to have actual sharing and collaboration within Pittsburgh, the idea that the community deserved the benefit of sharing when it came to safety improvement and quality improvement, that shouldn't be, kept, that learning shouldn't be kept just to a single health system. Is that a fair recollection of the intent? And
Yeah, it was quite remarkable, and yes, it is, and I'll just give a little bit of context. So this was organized in a full year before the Institute of Medicine First Do No Harm report came out.
mm-hmm.
And it came out during one of the initial deep intensifications of sort of healthcare changing to become much more competitive. And in Western Pennsylvania, relationships between the health systems had become extremely antagonistic, and they had not been historically.
Mm-hmm.
And it had deeply affected physician relationships, physician group relationships, all of that stuff. So there was a lot of negative stuff in the air. So much so that when a regional economic strategy was put together, healthcare wasn't even mentioned, even though it was increasingly important to the regional economy.
Right.
And I think, to pick up on a point you're making about the principles that were embedded in it, and I really give Mr. O'Neill full credit for this, is instead of sort of a forcing people to do things, he really raised people's sights using the principles that we recognize from TPS or Shingo or Lean,
Mm-hmm.
to say, isn't there something important that we can do together, rooted in the fundamental purpose that people come together here. And there's great power in competing on what should be competed on, but also not competing, and instead actually quite learning and sharing the learning openly about stuff that's beyond that, which is quality, safety,
Mm-hmm.
etc., and then pushing people to apply the principles. So, how fast, once you discover a safety improvement, can it be not just, spread to those you work with in this building, but to everybody in the community and beyond, ideally to everybody in the universe. So it was very exciting to see the shift from the wholly negative energy or largely negative energy to aspirational goals, and then applying some of the principles of transparency and rapid improvement, and but underneath it, respect for every individual
Right.
underneath it. So yeah, it was pretty exciting.
Yeah. I mean, it can be even today, some 25 plus years later, it can be a challenge to have that safety learning really spread within a health system.
Absolutely.
Even from unit to unit, it can be a challenge. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, and where you've seen organizations make progress through leadership about the need to, not keep things so close to the vest, maybe out of fear, and instead being able to have more transparency, even internal transparency in the name of learning and improvement.
Yeah, I mean, I think objectively, the healthcare community has overall made some significant cultural progress toward openness about harm and more transparency about problem solving and results, particularly in the lean healthcare community, where leaders, have taken the lessons to heart and tried to create more uh, organizations with some more of the principles of whatever you want to call it, high reliability, or
Mm-hmm.
we call it habitual excellence,
Mm-hmm.
embedded. However, globally, it is much less than we could hope for, right? There is still a lot of regulatorily oriented initial responses. Some of the sharing is still much more just share the new practice instead of the root cause and the why, and and vulnerability in different systems. So I think we have a lot of room still to grow, but we have lots of examples of places that have, and we're working with academic medical center now. We're 3 months in, and after being exposed to the ideas and beginning their journey actually just before from us, but just before we actually formally started with them, they've cut their harm rate over a third already,
Mm-hmm.
just by applying globally some of the principles that can accelerate progress so much
Yeah.
faster when leaders own it, right, and are willing to stand behind the principle despite the discomfort it causes the lawyers or other folks. So
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the early examples of applying that sort of breakthrough thinking, to safety was Mr. O'Neill's influence on Dr. Richard Shannon
yeah,
when Dr. Shannon was in at Allegheny. I think they're in
that's correct.
Pittsburgh, like the
Yeah.
first, if I remember the data right. I mean, it was a pretty immediate reduction in certain hospital-acquired infections, CLABSIs, like in the order of like 90% reduction
No,
through,
no,
yeah.
that no, that's absolutely right. And just a little bit of the backstory there is Dr. Shannon, who's gone on to be the chair. He
Mhm.
went on to be the chair of medicine at Penn, and the vice president of the whole University of Virginia for all the health sciences, including the health system, and now is the chief quality officer at Duke University Health.
Right.
At that time, he was the chief of medicine at Allegheny, which is the largest hospital in Pittsburgh. And actually, listeners may be interested. It's the fictional site of The Pit, the hit show now on HBO Max.
Yeah.
But Dr. Shannon was sent to some of the organizing meetings of the Pittsburgh Regional Health Initiative to defend the hospital's honor, particularly some outcomes data in cardiac surgery that was not entirely flattering. And he came into the meetings and was exposed to the framework that was at play here, which was not a punishment framework, but the excitement of getting better together framework. And he flipped
Mm.
almost instantly, he says, and became, just a great champion of the
Mhm.
ideas. And, and meshing the ideas of clinical improvement and excellence, which clinicians and other people in healthcare sort of naturally are trained with this sort of operational leadership thinking, which is, which fit together. And, you're absolutely right. In the ICUs, in the medical ICUs, CLABSI, a lot of the first work, proofs that you could go to very close to at zero and sustain it for a long time, and were produced together with activity-based costing level stuff to show, in fact, the CFOs that you think you're making a lot of money, and on paper you are from the infections, but do we really want to do that anyway? And in fact, if you look at the total picture, we end up far financially ahead by not making people sick this way, or killing them. So pretty dramatic work, pretty developed, dramatic cases that were published at the time and helped lead to some of the national movement checklists and otherwise that developed from there. And some of my expert colleagues at the CDC tell me that the progress on CLABSI and CADI that the nation's made overall are not to be minimized. That it is a different era. There's still flare-ups in many places, and you got to keep an eye on it for sure. But we now know we can get to zero, and more places get to zero and sustain it regularly. So,
yeah, and I think that's one of the principles that I would articulate from what I've read and heard from Mr. O'Neill is that we set goals at zero, and I think people in healthcare or any setting, people get scared because they feel like, oh well, if we don't hit zero, we're going to get punished, which was not really the intent of that aspirational, theoretical limits, not just the goal, but the approach to managing it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I got the chance to see Mr. O'Neill while he was still CEO of Alcoa, and kind of be behind the scenes as he talked to Alcoans and everything. And I remember him distinctly saying to people in one context, he said, the goal is clear. The goal is we aspire to be perfect on this. And he said, I don't know how we're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but I believe in you, and I believe in all of us working together. And I believe if the Lord didn't prevent it with the laws of physics from getting there, we can figure it out, because you guys have shown yourself can figure this stuff out on again and again and again. And so that's the way we think. That's the way we keep moving forward. And so it's very much that pulling people in, to what's possible when we try to think without boundaries, and move together in a unified way to learn what we need to learn. And Mark, if you're interested, there was another pivotal moment that relates to that kind of thinking.
Yeah, please.
Which, right around, this was in the Regional Healthcare Initiative early days, and the goal setting with the top, the CEOs of the key health systems in town, the insurers, others in the room, but also some of the medical leaders. It was, well, should the goal be zero nosocomial infections, zero CLABSI, zero CADI that we agree we're going to work toward? And just a lot of pushback, like I couldn't tell you. And I remember at one time, finally, one of the physician leaders, an intensivist, he said, Paul, I really don't think we should set the goal there, in part because I don't want people to think you're naive. I don't want to see you exposed that way. And Paul said, basically, tell me more. It was a very tense.
Right.
There was there was the right kind of crackling tension in the air. And the physician said, we actually don't know some of the science that would allow us to prevent every one of these things yet. And at that moment, O'Neill lit up. He just literally lit up with his energy. And he said, oh my God, he said, that's great. He said, why don't we be the community in the country that rallies our medical scientists together and organizes the studies and gets the grants, and we figure out that, those things that we need to know, and that's going to be part of our effort, And he's just like vibrating with that. We don't even know what we need to know yet at this point. And of course, the energy in the whole room totally changed. And they said, well, I guess we're not going to talk him out of it. And you got some of that positive energy behind it, but that's so much a part of it. That's so much a part of it. It's getting out of a top-down mindset in terms of control and thinking of leadership about guiding toward what's possible, and the role of
Right.
leaders being to get barriers out of the way and take
Yeah.
away excuses, which was another big one, and you and I have talked a
Hmm.
lot about that together.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
you
And that means like systemically eliminating the barriers and excuses, not just lecturing people to stop making excuses. Right? I mean, I think
right.
there's so much more of these like intertwined principles where it's not just. I think this was a book title from the '70s. It's not just the power of positive thinking.
No.
There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Right.
In terms of, that our job working together as leaders is to make sure that the systems of the organization are set up to, make life, getting the work done we're asking people to done easy, and engaging them in that process. And that includes problem solving and barrier removal, and making sure the barriers are visible, and then that we're there to help take them away. And of course, O'Neill set up, very deliberate strategy for how the leader of a very, very large, Fortune 50 organization in the world can do that through focusing on safety and teaching people what that means,
Yeah.
and, daily.
Yeah. And you mentioned, this is not a top down, John Toussaint calls this, white coat leadership, of feeling pressured that you have to have all the answers. You can't admit you don't know, or that you were wrong, or, that lack of humility or lack of vulnerability. But, in the O'Neillian playbook, it seemed like it's this balance between leaders setting direction and inspiring people, but
Yeah.
yet, as you said, Ken, the humility of saying, "Well, I don't know exactly how we're going to get there. I'm engaging you, empowering you, but yet there's elements of servant leadership to eliminate barriers." I believe strongly you can't delegate everything to the frontline staff.
No, right. Absolutely. Right. And Paul was always very clear about that. Only the leader can set ultimate direction, in consultation with lots of other people,
Mm-hmm.
and name the goals and have them be really important and keep people on track, and all of that. And I think, as we try to get beyond, like, I like what you said, get beyond the nice words and things,
Mm-hmm.
and more of what I learned from O'Neill over the years as people engaged him in these topics and got to see him do it. Well, I guess for 20 years. The, uh, you know, accountability's changed, right? So, for example, at Alcoa, and a lot of execs who led under Paul have made this perfectly clear, you were incredibly accountable for results, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you still had to, they wanted to be the best in the world at everything they did. Paul gave everybody 2 years when he came in to understand the best processes in the world for what they did, and to be there within a couple of years, close the
Mm-hmm.
gap to produce the results. But he understood it was the processes and the people that produce the results, right? So your leadership became about how great you are at getting the processes and the people supported so that you can, get the results of the business.
Mm-hmm.
But, you became, what was not okay was classic top-down behavior of hiding information from other
Yeah.
people so you can be successful, any kind of disrespectful behavior, etc. There was a part of it too where I remember Paul saying once that, um, at some level, at the EAP level, it's not like tensions lowered at Alcoa. In some instances, they were actually up during some of the stages of this transformation among people, because the accountability shifted. In other words, you couldn't just do what your boss told you to do, right? Because everybody became more accountable for working within the Alcoa business system, which is, they learned from TPS, from Toyota, and implemented themselves, with the safety foundation. And, I'm mindful of, I may be paraphrasing it wrong, but what we learned from Toyota, that, you have to free people from blame for the problems so that
Mm-hmm.
they are free to work on the problems.
Right.
And I think there was a whole new level of, you got to be way in on continuous improvement,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because that's our way. And that's how you get your results, through respect for people and continuous improvement and, alignment beyond it. But you're responsible, so
Hmm.
it's not a free lunch. It's
Right.
just, it's just working together in the ways that get the best results toward the
Mhm.
mission and, toward human fulfillment.
Yeah, and I think as Mr. O'Neill demonstrated in his time, as CEO at Alcoa, like to me, one of the other stated principles would be, getting past the idea of assuming there are inherent trade-offs between, let's
Right.
say, safety and financial performance. And
Yep.
Mr. O'Neill demonstrated. I mean, you and I have both used a chart that so powerfully shows the dramatic reduction in employee harm and the dramatic increase in the company's stock price
Yep.
as a result of, you brought up the phrase earlier, habitual excellence. And I wanted to ask you to talk about the power of starting with safety as a way of learning how to improve, how to lead, how to engage people in the mission of safety, and then all the spillover carry through effects that allow you to be excellent in everything you do. I was wondering if you could talk about that, maybe in particular about um, how that would play out, how that does play out in a healthcare system that can embrace
Yeah.
those principles.
Yeah. And we've seen it work again and again in healthcare. And I think part of the insight for why safety is such a powerful leverage point for bringing these ideas deeply into an organization starts with a recognition that any organization really is a very complex animal, right?
Uh-huh.
And, good luck telling everybody go learn a bunch of lean and just do it all everywhere, tomorrow. A leader needs a way to bring it into the organization that recognizes both the scope of their influence, but also the limits of their influence, right?
Mm.
And Paul would talk about safety as he tried to convince healthcare to go deep on this as the leverage point for transformation, as a way that did a lot of things. First of all, it connects with people at a more fundamental human level
Uh-huh.
than certainly outside of healthcare than the work they're doing. Right?
Uh-huh.
Like, does making aluminum matter as much as getting everybody home to their parents and kids and things safe in the afternoon? No, it doesn't. And so it's a more fundamental human value.
Right.
It's hard to argue with, right? He used to say for people that wanted a less than perfect safety goal for the year, well, let's have a show of hands, of the 10% of people in this room who want to get hurt, so that we can make our number and that kind of thing.
Right.
Another thing is it's pretty measurable, right? There are standards about how we measure events and what impact they have and things like that. And there are, in theory, at least consequences for lying or cheating about them, right? Especially in organizations that take this stuff seriously. And because, these things do have to be measurable. The other,
Right.
though, fundamental characteristic of safety and why it works is you cannot make a process much safer unless you really understand your process
Right.
at the front line, like that the people
Uh-huh.
are actually adding value to customers or patients or people in the case of our healthcare systems are engaging in. And it's a way of forcing the organization to make a primary level of attention what it's actually like to do the value adding work in the
Right.
organization and the processes that support it. And by using safety, an unarguable goal, one that is measurable, one that people sort of get it. Like, somebody got hurt or they didn't, or something, somebody almost got hurt or they didn't, or this could kill somebody if this had gone to the next stage. Like, it's not hard to understand whether it's safety or not.
Right.
But by using that lens as a way to get into process, you have to, change your focus to that level. And if you're going to get safer, become much better at staying oriented to safety and getting into effective problem solving and support for people doing the work. And
Uh-huh.
that's the secret sauce about safety, right? By doing it, and you can't, and by the way, you can't get there without doing some of the things healthcare is really needed to do. which is to get much closer to sort of solving problems one by one, which we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to sort of the stuff that the data as a whole teaches you in terms of where you might aim your focus and things like that. But you've got to get good at solving problems one at a time, and it carries all these benefits that actually are the key to keeping complex environments that are ever changing, like healthcare, simultaneously stable and flexible, right? Because things are changing all the time, things are coming up, and your ability to both solve problems, to maintain stability, while keeping people feeling safe, both physically and psychologically, has an outsized impact on how people feel, patients, customers, and the people in healthcare, but also on their skills and their abilities to work together, et cetera. And in fact, Mark, one of my hopes for this time in healthcare, and we see a good deal of it, I'd like to see more, is the organizations that have been most serious about applying the principles of lean, of Shingo in its generic form, of Toyota, across their organizations are able, I've had a couple CEOs we work with recently talk about the power of having been a few years into the journey now. They've got an agility, an ability to execute that they are just so thankful for as the uncertainty is rising to higher levels all around them. And they have more of a sense of their North Stars that aren't going to change no matter what. And they know that if the strategy has to shift, in a more tactical sense, if you will, because of how the healthcare reimbursement landscape are changing, as something like that around them, they have a really powerful engine that they can aim toward it. Well, safety is the ideal way to create that engine and to keep tabs on it. And it's not everything all at once. There's another thing about it that I'll just say that I think is a very powerful lesson Paul had for the TPS community, which I think the dominant mode of bringing TPS was and has been start with a model cell and then expand it. And Paul at Alcoa and ongoing really argued that the full operating system should be done that way, gradually expanded. But you need something early that right away from day one, people can understand they're a part of this. This is a part, everybody is a part of this. That teaches a lot of the same fundamental lessons and skills that then can be, really brought together with the full TPS operating system. We're passionate advocates about that. We can point to, organizations that are so glad they went that direction at the same time they were, more fully developing their chops for TPS.
Yeah. So we talked about, principles. You mentioned the Shingo Institute. One thing I wanted to dig into a little bit here is, Value Capture being an affiliate of the Shingo Institute. Still true that I know you were the first, still the only healthcare focused firm.
We are the only firm whose mission is solely healthcare. There are other Shingo affiliates who do some very nice work in healthcare, but we're the only sort of Shingo affiliate that's really, our mission is wholly dedicated to health and healthcare.
Okay. So thanks for clarifying that. And tell us what it means to be a Shingo affiliate. I mean, there's opportunities to teach. There's opportunities ongoing to bring people to organizations to meet with leaders who are taking a leader-led, principles-based approach. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I know Shingo is probably well known in the lean community, but it's this wonderful learning and teaching resource, research, learning, teaching, resource out of Utah State University, the Shingo Institute, and sort of they also award the Shingo Prize, as I think your audience knows, the sort of once described as the Nobel Prize of manufacturing, but spread to other fields. And Mark, you are a Shingo Prize winning author multiple times over, so congratulations to you.
Thank you.
One of there many different ways that Shingo helps people understand and spread the principles and gain from them. And those include workshops, a sequence of workshops that first provide an overview of the principles and the framework. Um, and it's principles that have been researched as, they're true in the universe, and whether you want to believe them or not. So they're sort of, as gravity is to, the space-time continuum, these are sort of the principles that govern, the long-term results of an organization, and the power of aligning your organization, your systems with them, and the peril of not. And so the workshops provide first an overview and then a structured review all the way through. And any organizations, leaders that are interested in learning the principles and being exposed to them, it's a wonderful sort of safe way to explore them in a deeper way, because the workshops, first of all, you can go to, they're always organized at a organization site. And so you can go somewhere else and see how they're being implemented as part of your learning. So there's didactic learning, and then there's go and sees in the organizations to illustrate principles and actually begin to build your skills with the principles right away, to be able to see organizations and how they're operating and systems in that framework, and then begin to build them, build improvements into them. But you can also have the workshops occur at your own organization in what's called a private workshop. And so any Shingo affiliate can come teach the sequence at your own place, and you can staff it and et cetera, and move through it. And the one thing that I would say about that model that I would encourage your audience, whether they be process excellence leaders or executives, is that the process excellence team learning the Shingo principles deeply is wonderful, and it's great, and it's obviously necessary. But the real gem, I think, is the leaders, right? Because it's all about, the operating leaders, and, building the principles deeply into the organization as advised by the process excellence team. And so, we make a strong point about encouraging the organization's top leaders to be present, because they're the ones that can leverage the full benefit out of the system. Yeah. Shingo also puts on a number of, conference-based learning events in the United States and around the world each year, that are wonderful learning events. And the Shingo community gets together in different places and ways, including I had the privilege of being on a prize assessment recently, and it was very powerful to have assessors come who are certified by the Shingo Institute, to come together from around the world and to really pay witness and evaluate the incredible work to get better that's being done in so many places around the world. And we'd like to see many more American healthcare organizations realize how powerful this framework can be for this time, in part because the Shingo Institute tells us, and we tell everyone who will listen, this is not just another alphabet soup to, that a consulting group is going to sell you, follow this checklist and then you will be, whatever it is, highly reliable or anything, follow our formula. This is instead a framework of principles that you apply to your own operating system in its current state to develop a stronger target state, and then use these principles as your guide, but it remains your operating system as an organization. And it's very different in that way, and I think much more productive over time.
And I'll put links in the show notes if anyone wants to look at what some of those upcoming opportunities, ongoing opportunities through value capture. I wanted to dig a little bit more into this phrase of a comprehensive operating system. Some people might call that a lean operating system, a lean management system, different ways of describing it. But I mean, what would be, your elevator pitch speech if you run across a, health system executive at a conference? Ken, what is, in short, a comprehensive operating system? What does that mean in terms of how we're operating differently?
Yeah, and I think Mark, let if I could, let's stipulate that we were at an improvement related conference and maybe even
Sure.
a conference of the lean healthcare community, and they'd say, "Well, wait a minute, we already run a daily management system. Ken, what are
Ah.
you talking about?" And one of the things that we have observed really over the last decade, but this really crystallized for us maybe 2.5 years ago, was that healthcare, we had fallen in love with a part of a complete lean operating system,
Mm.
particularly the management system. But we were not nearly fully developed enough and balanced in a complete operating system. So I would say to that leader in an elevator, well, are the principles fully embedded in your work system? And in a healthcare system, that's the flows of clinical care, how they're set up, how they're operated, to get
Mm.
results, how they're improved. And then is your improvement system, your continuous improvement system, are the principles fully baked in there. And then the management system is to make sure those two things are happening continuously, right, in an
Mhm.
integrated way, and to oversee that with people development as the core object, the core purpose of the
Right.
leadership system. And then, you can argue about where strategy a fourth system, or is it a subsystem
Mhm.
of continuous improvement? Those arguments bore me, but but it's basically work system, improvement system, management system. And in healthcare, there was early work around a lot of events, right, which were aimed at the work system, improving the work system in healthcare. And then people sort of realized that just doing events sort of leaves a lot of the underlying structure of the system and processes in place.
Right.
And coming out of Theta Care, and we were, the U.S. partner to help their business system spread, one of the first lean daily operating systems. And of course, in the West, it was Virginia Mason and others.
Yeah.
We fell in love with that.
Mhm.
And for obvious reasons, we needed it, etc. But also, leaders naturally think that way because it's more of a vertical system, right? Is the information flowing up and down the organization? Are we staying
Yeah.
aligned with the organization's major goals? Are people finding out about problems in a timely way, etc.?
Mhm.
But the management system is not a problem-solving system, right? Um, and we found what happened over time was people developed more sophisticated management systems. Of course, they fell by the wayside and got potholed and potmarked at some places, but some places really kept concentrating on that, but let some of their chops about the work system change slide. And I
Mhm.
would say further, they were never developed enough. And
Yeah.
and one part I would say to this leader is, if your lean work is still relying on your process excellence team to drive
Right.
a lot of it, the mindset has to shift to, it's the operating leaders, the people, your CNO, your CMO, those folks, they need to be, you need to think about your directors and your managers, and the way they set up their operations needs to embed the flow
Mhm.
principles, right? And the problem solving principles, because that's when the power takes off, when it's really
Right.
built in, right? When it's really
Mhm.
built into how the organization functions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a lean daily management, a daily engagement system, which is
Mhm.
okay, but you don't move
Mm.
the numbers in the big way. The magic of TPS is really not present. And so we've
Yeah.
been trying to get people, long answer to your elevator speech question, but we've been
Long,
trying
tall
to get
building.
people to rebalance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I cut you off there, making a joke about the elevator being a tall building. Could you repeat that last
I
comment?
just said it's really, we've been doing a lot of work to try to get people to rebalance and build
Yeah.
capability in all three or four parts of the system, depending on what pew you worship in,
Mhm.
and to integrate them.
Yeah. So to kind of summarize as we wrap up here, and again, we've been joined by Ken Segel from Value Capture. Um, what I hear you clearly saying is that operating system and management system are not synonyms; that those are different things. And I think back, and I point people to go search. Just have Google Value Capture 3 systems. The work system, the
Yeah.
improvement system, the management system. it's important to have all of that together.
And that's Shingo. That we didn't
Yeah,
invent that. That's yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then and there's a lot we can explore. Hopefully, in a future episode about unpacking those things. So yeah, I look forward to being able to do that. We're running a little short on time, but certainly a rich discussion. I appreciate the stories and examples and things that you're sharing, Ken. So I'd love to have you back here. And we're going to mention, I'm going to reach out to my old friend, Shanna Paget, who recently, I'll let you announce the news. I mean, it's out on LinkedIn. This is not breaking news, but I'll let you share
Yeah.
that, Ken.
Yeah, so a couple months ago, we went through a long planned generational transition at Value Capture, and I was proud and excited to hand off the CEO role to Shanna Paget, our vice president, who's been with us for
Yeah.
9 years, who is remarkable and already has us on a faster improvement journey ourselves, which is great. And Shanna is a long time friend and associate of Mark's from way back. So he
Yeah.
knows it's a step up in quality for Value Capture. So thank you, Mark.
Well, I'm excited for Shanna. Shanna, she was really my first healthcare improvement buddy 20 years ago, August of 2005, where we got to work together with a client. And so I'll reach out to Shanna to invite her to come be a guest here, hopefully on the podcast as well.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
Mark,
So go ahead, Ken. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say before we sign off, I just want to thank you, not just for this opportunity, but for all you do to advance these ideas and support people who are working with them, and always, trying to create better tomorrows. And your combination of skill and diligence is really notable, and I just hope you realize that.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So again, Ken Segel, Chief Revenue Officer. Or no, I got that wrong. My mistake. Chief Relationship Officer at Value Capture. I work with somebody in another organization who is a Chief Revenue Officer, so that rolled off the tongue. But my mistake. So it goes.
It's one of the accountabilities underneath the chief relationship officer. So
Yeah.
you were not wrong. There you go.
Okay. Well, wrong, but not wrong. But all right. Well, this has been fun, Ken. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Great to see you.